Hello and welcome to the 12th installment of Aaron Walker Art Talk. I'm Aaron Walker, and today I'm joined by Hannah Frankman. Hannah, how are you?
I am doing well. How are you?
I am excellent. So today you have chosen Gator to discuss. Do you want to go ahead and describe why you chose that?
Yeah. So when I went through your gallery on your website, this one immediately caught my eye. The other ones were hard. Like, it was hard to pick, but this one, it was just like, that's the first one. And I think there are a few reasons. It's so beautifully geometric, and there's so much contrast with that stark black background, and yet this very elusive sort of personality. This is going to sound strange, but there's like a distinct personality type, right? That's like very introverted and yet like strong, and in that it's like mysterious and elusive. And I just feel like when you look into this Gator's eyes, that's exactly what you see. It's like, it's visceral almost. I was very compelled to pick this one.
Well, that's very interesting, and it's not something that I've necessarily thought about before. So I can kind of relate this to the like technical aspect of producing it. So it doesn't show up well on camera. I can try to show it to this camera. So this is black, right? But there's actually a lot of like very dark greens in here. And actually kind of throughout the piece, there's a lot of color variation that doesn't pick up. And so what that could kind of imply, I think, is a sense of depth, right? And like this sort of various, like a gradient of color in space. So you use the term, what is it? It's an elusive personality.
Yeah.
Which is like a sort of, I think it's kind of like a sense of mystery. So I can see how like this aesthetic aspect would appeal to that like emotional aspect, right? But just as a quick side note, this was actually my first oil painting.
Really?
Yeah.
But, no way.
It was, but like.
That's a hard act to beat there.
Well, yeah, actually, I think it's probably better than the ones that came after it, but because I wasn't thinking about it quite as much. Like most of my work is in acrylic, but the style of this, it's what I really like about oil is that you like all of the strokes are very defined. So in acrylic, you get like this, it looks like almost dusty. Like if you don't have a ton of paint on the brush, then you don't get these defined lines. But with oil, it's always just like you're in like a digital painting, right? Where it's always defined. But I don't know. I also think that came out pretty good for a first oil painting.
It absolutely is. So I'm super curious about something you said there, because there are a few things you said that I'm curious about. And I want to talk more about like the image itself too. But you said that you think it was possibly better than some of your other oil paintings because you weren't thinking about it as much. But first of all, why weren't you thinking about it as much? And second of all, are you actually implying that like when you think too hard about things, like when you're actually trying to make a good painting, you don't?
Right. And I've described this a little bit in previous episodes, but like I have a somewhat like neurotic personality type, and I definitely have a tendency to like not only overthink things, but in my work, I have a tendency to overwork it. So I typically will take like progress pictures as I'm painting or doing an illustration. And a lot of the time there's a point, like if we'd had there's like a bell curve almost of how good it is, like through time, where it's like, okay, like you're getting more defined, it's more work. Okay, cool. And then like right around here is where I should have stopped, but then I just keep going and it just kind of falls off.
Why do you keep going? Because you think it can get better? Hindsight's 2020 is like, oh yeah, this was like a lot better like a couple hours ago.
Well, this is something I've gotten better about, right? Is knowing when to stop and appreciating something like negative space, right? So if it's an illustration in black and white, there has to be a balance between like places that you actually put ink and the places that you don't, the negative space. But why do I keep going? Because it's not quite perfect, right? Like, if it was just a little bit more, right? And I think there's a phrase that I said in another episode. It's the perfect is the enemy of the good, right?
Okay. Okay. So do you think that perfection is attainable?
Um,
Now we're getting philosophical.
in my painting, like,
Yeah, in
like,
art, in art. There
uh,
are two parts of this question. It is like objectively, is perfection attainable? And then do you feel like perfection is something that you can obtain?
I think that it is, but maybe not in a given piece. And I think that another word for perfection would probably be mastery. So if you look at Raphael or Michelangelo or Caravaggio, like I would say that their works are perfect, period, because they've reached a level of mastery where they understand how to go about their pursuit, their chosen pursuit, right?
Do you feel that there is no way for their paintings to be better?
No.
Interesting. Is it possible as an artist to know when you have obtained perfection? Or is it something that you're blind to because it's your own, in the same way that like and because you're still learning, this may not be the best analogy, but like, the same way that you think you need to like add something.
I mean, okay. So we're talking about like perfection from these different points of view and inside and outside of the perspective of the artist. So some of these things can get muddled, but
Right.
like one first thing you have to say is, okay, from the artist's perspective, it's perfection from the perspective of the artist. So it's like they have, that kind of implies that they have a vision in their head of what this painting is, which they then attempt to attain or materialize, right, to bring into being through their work. In that sense, I think most artists can't reach perfection, right? And that it's probably for the best that they recognize like a good stopping point. I'm not the only one who has this problem, mind you. I've seen it a lot. And it's
I'm sure. I know.
I didn't go to art school, but I've had art teachers talk about it, right? From an outsider perspective, if I'm talking about Caravaggio or Michelangelo, then I would say that their work is perfect in the sense that, well, to put it the way you said, is there any way they can make this piece better? And the answer is no, it's perfectly fine. Whether they worked on it for another hour and added or subtracted something, it's reached that same perfection. Because when you reach the level of mastery in your pursuit, perfection is like, I don't want to say, it's like 100%, right? Like it's 100% and then it's 101% and 102%. It's like everything above 100 is mastery. Everything above 100 is perfection. So perhaps more work could be put into it, but I'm not sure it could become more perfect.
Okay, that makes sense. So I have one more question, like this abstract realm, and then I want to come back to the painting itself. But do you feel like as you have become more adept at seeing like when it's time to stop and when you've hit that point on the bell curve where it's like, I don't really think I'm going any higher, like I better cut it here. Can you feel like a shift in the creative energy maybe, or in like your flow state, or in like, it's a very abstract thing, right? And I don't know how you experience it because like I am not a fine artist. I don't do like visual art, but like, do you feel different in relation to the art and like the sense you have about it when you know it's time to stop? Or is it more of like an analytical thing?
So I think it's both analytical and experiential in the sense that, again, neurotic personality type, or even like manic when painting, right? So I never paint unless I'm like in a manic frenzy, because it's like I'm captivated by this image and it must be transformed into oil, like obviously. But so I go in and it's very quick, right? So like the process for most of it is a very quick thing because you can see what needs to be done, and so you set about doing it. But as you approach that stopping point, whatever it may be, things slow down, and you have to like observe it and then come back and observe like from a distance. Because of course, if you're like 3 inches doing like some detail, it's very likely that you're not considering the larger piece. And so the process slows down like as you approach the end.
Okay, this makes sense. So I promise I'm going to segue back to the actual painting because like, and I'm trying to do that here because I said I was going to, but I want to know more about it, and we can tie this back to like the actual like painting we're talking about here. What you're talking about, like you're in this manic state when you are painting, and you have it, and you said it's because like you have this idea that's all of a sudden like I have to get this out. Where, first of all, there's like serious contrast between that statement and this like introverted, contained, mysterious, elusive feeling that is being conveyed by the painting, which I find very interesting. But like, where do these ideas come from? Like, and you don't have to, you can answer this in a broad sense, but you can also answer it just in relation to this painting, because I swear we're going to talk about that next.
What do you mean by where do these ideas come from? So the first question was this contrast between a manic state of the painter versus the introverted state of the painting itself.
Right, very calm.
So that's this opposition going on. But then you asked, what was it?
And I just agreed with you. So I want to know like where the painting comes from, meaning like, is this like an idea that you're just like hit by and you're like, okay, I see this thing, I want it to be on the page? Or is it something like you draw inspiration elsewhere? Is it a process? Does it happen all at once? So and then specifically, where'd this come from? This
is going to be like an answer, like a question that's better answered in the next episode.
Okay. Cool. We can talk about that later. I am totally okay with that.
But for this particular one, it was, this is so lame because I wish it was like a more artistic answer, but this was actually more out of necessity because I was the impetus was do an oil painting. And I had like I had black, white, blue, and green, and then this like weird orange that really isn't in the painting that much. And I was like, well, what can I paint with these colors effectively? And so I looked I have like probably like 200 gigs of like reference pictures that I collected. So if I'm just going through Tumblr or what have you, I will just save an image and say like, I might do something with that later. Mm-hmm. And so I just went back through some of them, and this was like a captivating image that I thought that I could work with.
Okay, so it was very intentional. I also think it's funny that you say that this is something better and talked about in the next episode, because I actually intended to ask you that question about the next painting, which I find very interesting. I'm curious to see like the correlation there between our logics.
Right.
Okay, so this is one of a few animal paintings that you have, which I saw when I was scrolling through your portfolio, and this one caught my eye. Is there any like specific reason? Because, like you have an armadillo that feels like it's very similar in style. You have some others that are different, but there are similarities between all of them. They're these very stark, very like visceral kind of raw feeling to all of them. And it's always like this animal just like standing alone. Is there a specific connection between these? Is there a reason why you keep coming back to animal pictures? Is it just coincidental, or is there a reason why you're drawn to them?
So part of it again has to do with like the motivation for picking a subject, right? First of all, I consider myself to be, or at least my painting style to be, post-impressionist, right? I would put myself probably in the vein of post-impressionist art. If like in a technical aspect would be like the thick impasto strokes, which is pretty consistent throughout most of my work. And part of what I'm doing when I look at a subject is looking at the texture and the lines and the sort of patterns that are emerging from the reference picture and how I can recreate these on the canvas, right? And typically animals have just, I should say in the simplest term, just very interesting sort of textures to them, right? So the armadillo has like this shell, I guess you call it. I'm not exactly sure what you call it. But it has these lines that you could imagine them on like a Urban Outfitters tapestry. Like they're very, like it's very intricate and very like aesthetically pleasing. And if you look at the Gator, he has the scales. And so these are things that I think are captivating and aesthetically pleasing. And so I tend to replicate them on the canvas.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not so much the animals themselves or anything that they symbolize, it's more a fascination with the texture.
So yeah, it's not like a symbolic, I don't want to say this across the board because I do have some symbolic pieces, some pieces that have like symbolic weight with the animals. One of them would be like Nietzschean religion, which is a hawk standing over a pigeon or a dove, but yeah, standing over a dove. Like that's thick symbolism, right? About what the hawk represents as like a bird of prey and the dove as this bird of peace. So with Gator, I mean, no, there's not a symbolic sort of relationship between the Gator and the execution.
Okay. So this is my last question for you on this one. So I'm fascinated by the way that artists see things like color and texture, which is something like I'd always kind of been aware of, but like I'm a word person. So I always thought about like, okay, I see things. How do I describe that? How do I articulate that? Mm-hmm. But when I got into like photography and video work, especially photography, I realized that like the way artists see light is so different. Mm-hmm. You just like become aware of the way that light changes the space you're in and like the human face, the way it responds to light. Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. And, since realizing that, out of necessity, out of practice, be like, oh my gosh, there's so much here. I become fascinated by how, light and color just like relates to everything. I find it so interesting you're talking about texture because that, is a direct product of light and color. And I don't know if this question is going to be like clear for you to answer, but okay. I'm curious if you can talk about like the process, I guess, of looking at a picture. Like, what do you see, and how do you translate that into something on a flat piece of canvas that is defined by color and the illusion of light?
So I hope this isn't too dry, but the explicit sort of technical process is, I think, twofold. So if I was going to give advice to someone on how to go about it, it would be just generally like two rules. The first one is, with acrylic at least, it's dark to light. So you begin, I personally do a graphite sketch underneath with a graphite stick, right? And really, when I'm doing that, I'm thinking about what the darkest area is in like the most distant part of the painting, and like where there is the least light, right? And so then when I'm painting, it's typically black first, wherever black is, and that's where it's going to go, and then going very lightly over like the actual form of the subject, right? And then you build up to light, because of course whatever part of your subject is closest to the light is going to be the lightest, right? And so that'd be the first rule, dark to light. And the second would be follow the form of your subject. So an easy sort of exercise that you can do is to draw a three-dimensional sphere. And the way you do that is you start with a circle, and then you follow the curvature of the circle, right? When you're like doing the sketch. And so that is how I approach at least bringing a subject to life on canvas, or making it three-dimensional on canvas.
That wasn't too dry and technical at all. That was awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Like I said, I find it fascinating the way that artists work and see and translate that. So no, that wasn't too dry at all. That was awesome.
Well, thank you, Hannah. I think that in the hopes of preserving some topics for future episodes, I think I'm going to cut it off here.
I promise we have plenty to talk about, but yes, that's fine.
and see you in the next episode, okay?
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
Absolutely.